Come on, Ruby, come on. Stay, stay, stay. Okay, come on. Hey, good afternoon. Well, actually, good evening, I should say here. It's after 6, but we've gone to daylight savings time here. Just out walking the dog. Thought I'd do a quick live. Hey, Sheila. Nice to see you, as always. If you don't know Sheila, I'll tell you what, man, you don't get many people nicer than her. She's a pretty solid human being. And also doesn't take any bullshit either. That's the right. It's kind of windy, so I apologize for the noise. But we're going to do our best to have a little chat. You know, unfortunately, I've had to make the difficult decision to no longer go in any other people's lives as far as that, because these I'm not going to try to be polite. These pro-Israel supporters, this is going to be overbearing. I don't want to say something overbearing. The ones that I've encountered here on TikTok, and this is not a woe is me story. I mean, you got to have thick skin, but man, are they mean as snakes, man. And instead of talking about the issues, like, what's happening with the war or broader policy, and they do that sometimes, but man, do they go after people personally when they want to. And it's just disgusting. You all know from when I conduct my lives, I get some pretty rough characters up here. Even the guy that said he wanted to anally rape me, I didn't go after him. I just don't go after people. It's just not my way of doing stuff. And personal attacks are a weak thing to do, because if you can't argue a point, you go to the called ad hominem attacks. And it just goes to show you, when you can't beat somebody at the merits, which, let's face it, Israel's case is weak. I mean, it's beyond weak. It's non-existent. In fact, Alan Dershowitz wrote a book a while back. I read it. It's called The Case for Israel. I'm not kidding you. And it is just filled with every lie and distortion, human shields, the whole 9 yards, most moral army, all that crap. And it's just, I think the thing that we have to remember, those of us who are trying to advocate for Palestinian freedom and self-determination, you're dealing with a bunch of people who are, unfortunately, and this is also broad, but the ones that have a chance to influence policy, these are not good people. I hate to say it. They may be friendly to those in their own group, but in terms of having a good, honest, pure heart and being decent to everyone, no way. They're supremacists, they're mean, they're cruel, they're barbaric. And listen, it's all indicated by it's all about the behavior, right? I'm not supposing this. If you look at the history of this conflict, which is hard to do, by the way, the more you learn about it, the more discouraged and sad you get. I was, you can call it lucky, I guess, but it was total happenstance that I learned about it when I did a long time ago. And just everything I've ever heard about it. And I'm not happy for the way the attacks went in terms of resistance. I don't want to see people in Tel Aviv or Haifa get hurt. I mean, who does? Especially civilians. But I also understand within the context. And what would I do if I was in those circumstances? Would I sit back and take it? And I wonder how many people, if the script were flipped, if Israelis were living under those circumstances, what they would do. I mean, obviously they got a little taste over the years of what they exhibit in terms of their behavior, what they inflict on Palestinians, and they went absolutely apeshit. So anyway, it's just discouraging. So the one thing you can tell, though, is you can tell how people behave. Not what they say, but what they do. And in terms of these apps, these people just, oh God, they're just so, kind of make me sick to my stomach. I hate to say it. So yeah, they focus on little shit. Like, anyway, I don't want to get into details. It's just, let's focus on the positive. So, the good news is that some of the noise that people who are now learning about this issue are making is making a difference. It hasn't completely changed the policy, but we have gotten some things to be said and acknowledged publicly, which is a lot better than it was in prior years, where it was hidden from view. But what I most want to say is that until there's a change of mentality on the Israeli side, because there is, in many cases, a disdain and hatred that drives the decisions that are made. That has to change. And I think until that changes, we're not going to see much movement. They're already talking about settling in Gaza. I was reviewing some videos today that were showing the destruction in the north and central parts of Gaza. And I also have some videos on my phone. So I have a bunch of stuff stored up. I've been collecting these for the past 3 months. And I'm going to put together a montage video that's just going to be like clip, 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 just showing the destruction, the bombs going off, the leveling of the buildings, the people, the whole 9 yards. And TikTok can suck a big one in terms of whether they take it down or not. I'm just going to post it because it's the truth. And, at some point, we're going to have to stop using this ridiculous language and just speak like human beings and use the actual language of what's happening. I know Nader who did a video about that. And he said, these aren't unaliving kids. These are murdering children, etc. And so we should be allowed to speak openly. We should have to use this ridiculous coded language for the algorithm. Fuck the algorithm. And basically, listen, we're sort of it's a mixed feeling I have towards TikTok because one, this kind of functionality is really great to have. You can kind of hop on and just talk to people, but at the same time, the silliness, the shenanigans, as I call them, is getting to be absurd. And so, anytime I go into any subject that's remotely off the beaten path, I get taken down for misinformation. And it's just all it is counter narrative stuff. If it comes out in the U.S. media, it's okay because it goes along with the desired foreign policy and domestic policy objectives. But as soon as you stray away from the corporatism or the militarism, all of a sudden you're spreading lies. God forbid you talk about what happened on the 6th. I was on, I don't know if you saw, but I was on a couple lives today that were basically, I call it retail politics. There was somebody that was very, very, it was like a vote blue kind of thing. And again, the way how tribal these people are, they can't step back away from their tribe and just take a look at different merits of this and that. It's all or nothing. And that's just not how my brain thinks. So anyway, I was trying to talk about, listen, I think there's some legitimate questions with what happened towards the 2020 situation. I mean, let's take first and foremost, we have these machines, right? They're owned by private corporations. They tally the pieces of paper that supposedly come through the process. Sorry about the dog barking. They tally it. We don't, but they can't be audited because the companies say, hey, how you doing? The companies say that it's proprietary software. What the hell are you supposed to do with that? How can you have a fair and accurate count without somebody having a third-party verification of the thing that's doing the counting? So between the counting, which is the scanning part, and the tabulation, and then it's also the transmission. Because once something's counted, it's got to go somewhere. And when it goes somewhere, who knows how, so there's a lot of questions about how all that works, right? Nobody knows for sure. And I know that somebody who questioned it publicly on Fox News, which was Tucker Carlson, they sued the network. But I still don't have any definitive idea about that stuff. And that was part of the conversation that I had today with those folks. And they get angry. They get literally angry, saying you're some sort of a whack job. But the point is, that's the groupthink that they want people to have. They want people to think, oh, there's no way, these are all conspiracy people, blah, blah, blah. I can't say for sure. I don't have all the evidence. And I told them that, trying to be fair and objective. And all they did was excoriate me. Like, oh, man, you're not being reasonable. Listen, I don't have to agree with your point of view to be reasonable. And I have a lot of questions. And listen, it's okay to have questions, but not for these guys. So anyway, for 2024, there's a lot of people being very, very belligerent about who they think should win. And, Biden's like, operating on fumes, not to mention the shit show he's been putting the country through with money and inflation as well as these foreign, misadventures, allocating $150 billion or so, or we desperately need that money at home. Anyway, the whole story. So, like I said, I don't think Biden is going to be the nominee. I think he's going to withdraw sometime early midsummer. And I think Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is going to take his place with Harris as the VP again. That's my best guess. It'd be pretty hard to get rid of both people. But so it's going to be interesting. But I really believe that if the election were held today, I think Trump would win. And I'm not a Trump fan. But I think it's fair in terms of being objective to look at what happened during the Trump administration, or more importantly, what didn't happen. So during Biden's tenure, we've had two wars that have broken out, one in Ukraine, and of course the one we're talking about with Israel and Palestine, specifically Gaza and H group. Under Trump, there was still activity in Syria in terms of occupation and stealing resources, but there were no new conflicts. There was the assassination of General Soleimani, but there weren't any new major conflicts. You got to look at this stuff. He went to North Korea, he talked to Kim Jong-un. The previous administrations have always said, well, unless they meet these preconditions, we're not going to talk. Talking is always the smart thing to do, even if you disagree with somebody. It's better to have an open line of communication. The Biden administration right now, the Anthony Blinkens of the world, they don't have a direct line to Russia. Can you believe this? In terms of this day and age, they don't have direct communications with the Russian government. That is incredibly irresponsible. I mean, just imagine if there was some sort of a false alarm and they can't contact them to make sure. I mean, that's potentially catastrophic for everything on the earth, not just us. And guess who's going to be hit with megatons of that stuff? Everybody, all the major cities here. Guess them goodbye. And the crazy part, if you're not familiar with this, and this is bad for the United States, all of the interdiction systems, the NORAD defense systems, are pointed due north because the initial expectation was based on the technology the Russians had during the Soviet era, they could only send their missiles over the North Pole. So they would go over the atmosphere into space, come back down because their range wasn't as distant. And of course, the payloads were smaller. Well, now they have larger payloads and they have much faster, longer range that can go over the South Pole. So the U.S. has no ability to interdict these missiles if they get fired. They're going to come out of submarines. They're going to come out of the Russian territory and other friendlies where they have them stashed, and it's going to be lights out. So why in the hell wouldn't you maintain a phone contact with the leadership? This is how obstinate and how irresponsible and short-sighted these people are, in my opinion. I mean, who knows? Maybe I probably couldn't do any better, but these are people that are supposed to play by the smarter way of doing things. So I think that's very dangerous. And of course, the cavalier nature. Diane Sayre's been on the program, the Senate candidate for New York, and this is what we've talked about: the cavalier manner with which the U.S. is sort of throwing its weight around right now, using Ukraine as a proxy against Russia, and really not caring about what's happening with backing Israel, thinking there's no consequences to be had ever. And think about it: we already had one person do an extreme act of protest in front of the Israeli embassy. It's not too far fetched to think that somebody who's really, really, really upset by this might do something else. Gosh forbid. So I don't know. I just think this is the wrong side of history that the United States and Israel are on. And I hate to say it, just like in Germany, we look back in history with sort of in horror. Why did the people not rise up? Well, this is exactly the same situation. Why aren't the Americans why aren't we rising? Well, because it's not easy, right? And you might get in trouble. You might go to jail or worse. So there's a fear factor there. That makes sense. So these situations are bad examples where people like us, myself included, are talking a lot about it, which is good that we can talk about it. But for this issue and so many more, there's just some other things that are going to have to take place. I think we've talked about that a lot before. And I mentioned that on the live today, the live that I was on. And I'm sorry I'm not looking at comments right now. I'm just taking in nature while I take a little break from sharing this with you and giving my eyes a rest. So sorry if I'm ignoring you. But we've seen this before. The United States, in this issue and so many others, are blocked by the same forces. And the question is going to come down to is how long are we going to sit back and allow these forces to not only maintain their power, but to increase it? And I think what's going to likely happen is, you don't have to be a genius to figure out as people's lives get worse and worse. Well, eventually they're going to do something, right? They realize the voting's not going to help. They're kind of just sliding into oblivion while the rich get richer and these wars keep going on. They're gonna want to do something, right? So there's going to be tools put in place and curbs, most likely, as I would do if I was on that side of the fence, to stop it or slow it down from happening. Remember, this thing I'm talking into right now, most of us have one of these, and we're like slaves to these things. They're part of our body almost. I mean, I'm on this thing like 14 hours a day, it seems like. So this is the tool through which we live now. So if they can have tools that work within this system, well, obviously it's going to be a big part of monitoring and controlling, right? Makes sense. And you add in the financial stuff, social credit stuff, if that comes to be, programmability. I talked to my mom about that last night. About, she's older, she's probably not going to deal with this shit, thank goodness. But I think it'd be silly to not think something like this is going to come down the pike, and it's already in the process. So life is most likely going to become very challenging in America and other Western countries, given all these things moving in the wrong direction. The question is, how or when are we going to do something to shift the trajectory of this stuff? And it's kind of like the frog in the water. I like to say it this way. So the whole frog in the warm water story. The frog starts to, water gets a little warmer. The frog's like, well, hey, this isn't quite as comfortable as it was before. And then the water starts to get very hot. But I think in this case, and this is metaphorically speaking, as we start to realize how hot the water's getting when we want to hop out, there's going to be a big lid that's going to come down, and we can't leave that water. It's going to be pretty tough sledding. Now, I don't know. People say that Trump is the authoritarian, or that democracy is at risk. I think that's a bunch of bunk. But I'm also equally, I think it's delusional for those, and there may be some in the chat. I'm not trying to demean you personally, but for those that think that Trump is going to somehow magically come in and right the ship, remember that under Trump, for the first 2.5, 3 years of administration, the economy was doing pretty well. But that's all cyclical. It's mostly based on interest rates. So Biden just so happened to be in office. And by the way, I don't think he's a good with the economy, but still, he got caught in a bad cycle. But the stock market's way up for people who are rich and people have 401ks. It's going to probably come down pretty quick here soon. But, people thought life was much better under Trump. There were some tax breaks. They were meager for the middle class, but they were mostly for the wealthy class. 88% of all the tax breaks that Trump put through was like 1.4 trillion, went to the top 0.5%. Typical American policy. But the point is, there is no savior coming, whether it's a congressperson, a senator, a president. These people are limited in what they can do. And they have some latitude, but look at how much pushback Trump got just for trying to work around the intelligence community. And we know from history, if anybody tries to buck those guys and gals, it doesn't usually work out so well. So I think that's why Trump is hated primarily, notwithstanding his personality and how he rubs people the wrong way, being divisive. But he's just not from the same cloth as the Clinton, Obama pedigree and the Bush stuff, this permanent establishment crap. So anyway, so that's where we find ourselves, late stage empire, late stage capitalism. And listen, I'm not trying to be negative, Nanny. Let's face it, life is still pretty damn good in America for some people, although many are struggling. I did, like I've shared with you, I've done Uber driving, and the working class is really struggling. Anybody who is getting a wage or a relatively quote unquote minor salary. In fact, some of the salaried people have it worse. I used to work at a tire place, and they called me a manager. I wasn't a manager. I was just a worker, but they call you that. And then they can put you on this silly salary that's meager, and they work 65, 70 hours a week for your salary. So since your hourly pay gets below like $8 an hour, but it's all considered to be, manager. So it's all just, these corporations, they just try to squeeze every bit of juice out of the worker lemon that they can for profit. Now, I've been talking a lot before about co-ops. And I think what I'm meant to do, because I have a business background, I have an MBA in finance. I know I like talking on here, but I really should be working on co-ops. We should be finding ways to create business structures that compete with these behemoth corporations. It's going to be tough, obviously, but we have to convince customers in the local area to support the local businesses. Hopefully the prices can be kept close. But we want to form entities where the money stays in the organization at the local level. It doesn't go up to investors. We may have to pay off some debt to the bank, 6-7% loans, but that's debt capital, not equity. We don't have to give ownership to these rich pricks, excuse my language. Because right now they own everything. Let's face it, we're up against a group of people that own us. They own almost every single thing that we do. And, we have a for-profit healthcare system where people go into debt just paying their premiums, much less, God forbid, you get sick. Now you got to pay a copay of $60,000 for a $2 million fix-up. And you're done financially for life. That should never happen. That's insanity. So that kind of stuff's got to go. And all these corporate excesses with price gouging, there have been some studies done on that recently. So again, in a cooperative model, the way it works, for those of you who haven't heard me say it, it's a flatter business organization. You don't have investors, or at least not many, the way you do in a public company. And the money doesn't flow to the top. The money stays in the horizontal nature of the business. So for example, let's say we're working with a digital marketing company. Let's say we have 100 employees. You're going to have, let's say, 5 people in middle management and 5 people in upper management or whatever. So the managers don't get paid any more than a small multiple of the average salary in the organization. So for example, let's say the average salary is $60,000, $5 grand a month. The people at the top can't make more than 20 grand a month. Multiple of 4, for example. You can live an okay life off of 25. You may have to get one person who's really good for a little bit more than that, but the point is that it's a democratic structure. The workers vote. The whole company votes. It's one vote, one human being in a company. Now you have to have some executive committee that goes through all the different options and puts out some different options on the table. You're not going to have everybody do that. But the company decides when it's going to take on debt to grow the company. The company decides if it's going to sell a new product or provide a new service. It's all done democratically. If you want to have X number of sick days, maternity leave, it's all voted on by the group. And then you figure out a way to make the business work around those decisions. You don't have some corporate, excuse my language, dickhead or boss telling you how it's going to be. Go back in your cubicle and shut the F up. And you won't need to unionize because the workplace is a union. It's a collective. It's a cooperative. Now, I think that sounds a hell of a lot better than going to work for some corporation where they can get rid of you in a heartbeat or replace you with automation. And you go to work every day and you benefit financially from the company. So you're directly involved in the upside. So you're going to go to work every day, hopefully with a little giddy up in your step and want to give as much as you can because it's like all for one and one for all. And I think that's a good way to do business. They do exist in the world, by the way. They're in Europe and in South America, and they're here in the United States too. There's some. They're not very large or very noteworthy. But there's no reason why we can't start forming those things. Like for example, a lawn care company. And I know most people want to start a business to make money. We have to rid ourselves of this. I got to go out and make a bunch of money. This entrepreneur bullshit. You can still use your entrepreneurial skills to lead an effort, but we want to lead in a community-driven way, not in a self-serving way. And you might say, well, that's easy for you to say. You're not doing it. Well, yeah, but I'm more than willing to live off of, let's say, $4,000 a month. That's plenty for me to pay my bills. So everybody has different aspirations. Some people want to have a vacation home and a yacht and whatever. I don't want any of that shit. I want for the most people to live the best life possible. And yes, that sounds like socialism or Marxism or communism. Call it whatever the hell you want. I call it more egalitarianism for more people. Now, it's not a guarantee of outcome. I just heard Joe Rogan talk about this. But everyone should have the same opportunity in society. There shouldn't be crummy schools. There shouldn't be bad nutrition, these food deserts. Everyone should have access to the basics. There shouldn't be a single private jet, a single yacht, a single 10,000 square foot mansion or whatever you want to call it, fancy jewelry, all that stuff's got to go, man. This glamour shit that these serial accumulators have is counterproductive to the benefit of society, and capitalism drives that. It encourages that. Now, I'm not hating on anybody who's taking advantage of the system as it is. There's some very smart and hardworking people that have worked very hard to accomplish what they've accomplished. So there needs to be some transition way of doing it that's not completely unfair. It's not like you snap your fingers one day and everybody's got to give up all their stuff. That sounds a little, a little too much over the top. But there needs to be a transition way to, I hate to use this word, but you have to redistribute all of the, what I would call ill-gotten wealth. Let's face it, the tax policy and all of the other policies benefit the ownership class, the capital class. And so therefore, it's not unfair to have a period of, if you want to call it a clawback or other, progressive taxes or some other way to, reallocate stuff, because there's plenty here. There's so much to go around. It's just all hoarded. I always use the example of a big Thanksgiving dinner at church. And imagine having 1,000 people at this huge, buffet. And the first 5 people go up and they take 75% of the stuff off the table. And they go into the corner with armed guards and eat their plate of food, and the rest just sits in the corner. I'm like, what the hell? What the hell with that? That's how America's set up. And then the next 15 or 20 people go up and take half of what's left. And then the other 975 people get to go up and fight for the rest. And that's America. That's capitalism. It's rugged individualism for the people. It's welfare for the corporate people. Whenever something goes wrong for them, they get a bailout. So that's what I'm sick of. And again, it's not going to be easy to get to because obviously there are a lot of people that are benefiting from the status quo. They have a lot of money and power, and what goes with that is force. And it's probably not going to be a smooth transition. It would ideally be where people could go and rally and hopefully do things that are basically just simple civil disobedience without there being too much pushback. But that's probably a fantasy to think it's going to go down that way. But I do think that's the only thing that's going to push the needle. And it may not work. Chris Hedges has said this, the author and intellectual. He says it's probably not going to work. Whatever thing does come to materialize because of all these structures that are in place, they're very formidable. And I wouldn't blame anybody for not wanting to venture out of their lane because just like we talked about as far as the Germans, it's scary to even think about this stuff, much less actually, commit to being a part of something like that. It could cost you your life. It could cost your family in jail or whatever it may be. But, it'd be nice if we could convince some of the people from within who see the bigger picture and the importance of having the public not be so marginalized and have them lead the charge from within or do it through the voting system. That'd be ideal too, right? I think everyone would want it to be that way. Just like the Palestinians wanted to have a peace accord. Why wouldn't they want a peaceful resolution to their plight and have self autonomy without taking up arms? Nobody wants to fight. But sometimes other people make fighting. I think it was Kennedy or somebody who said, when you make peaceful resolution impossible, you make violent confrontation or something inevitable. And that's probably true. Think about it. And every single major change in the world has typically been accompanied by some form of distress, I said. I'm certainly not advocating for it because at this point, there's not a whole lot of clarity on how it could be possibly happening. I was in one of the lives today and I said something similar to this. And somebody said, so let's start talking about some reality. And I've been criticized like that before. But I think pointing out the framework of the power structure and the inability to change it through the traditional process is not an exercise in futility, it's an exercise in realism. And if you are someone who insists on only relying on the inside of the existing system, you're going to get what that gets. And you may be happy with that. I believe that in order for the average person to eventually achieve some reasonable standard of living without total control, it's going to be and I think a lot of people get it now, especially on the right, more so than the left. And I'm not aligning with people on the right. I'm just saying I've heard more and more conversation about this. And I think that's part of why Trump got elected. Think about it. People are sick and tired of these plain old, same old establishment candidates that just perpetuate the status quo. They're just done with it. Let's just try anybody who might change. That's why the H group got elected. I think the people of Gaza realized this is just more of the same. This is insanity. Nothing's going to give. These people won't behave decently. What else do we have to lose? Now, you could argue that what they had to lose was the damage that's being done right now. And fair enough. That's a good point. But what it's done is, I always like to say, and I was just watching videos this morning, like I said, the amount of war crimes that the Israelis are committing and have committed is literally off the chart. And if they were just going after the H group, okay, got it. But how is this going after the H group? Once you make your way into the center of Gaza, there's no more enemy. All the civilians have been unalived or gone. And you start placing charges like you were if you were a demolition company to start destroying infrastructure, mosques. So I'm just so beyond disgusted. And, I put out a tweet a while back, and this is not the nicest way to put it, but it comes from a place of frustration. I'm not Palestinian, but I sure do feel some of the emotion of the frustration having studied this issue for so long and just seeing no light at the end of the tunnel for these people. And they just take it and 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 take it. It's horrible. And so I said something to the effect that when the Nova Music Festival was attacked, I said, it's not as much fun when the people running away from this festival get a taste of the medicine they've been doling out on Palestinians for so long. And I said it in a little less peaceful way than that, which was wrong. But still, it's born from frustration and anger, which isn't the best emotion for us to harbor. I get that. But nonetheless, it exists, right? I think everybody thinks about it. Somebody says, listen, it's okay to have somebody who's pro-Israel in the chat. I don't want to have people, knocked out for just being a different point of view. I just don't want people saying harsh personal stuff. So if somebody's advocating for their point of view, that's fine. In fact, I always enjoy having people up who do because it's interesting to have the exchanges. But, listen, I could just walk away from this like anybody else and just ignore it. Right? A lot of people do. But, I think that's the wrong. Come here, dog. Come here. Sorry, my dog's whining. Quit whimpering. I hate it when she does this. Get on your bed. Sorry about that. So let me take a look at some of the comments I've been ignoring. No. I didn't cheer October 7th. What I did was let me tell you exactly what happened. So on Twitter, somebody posted a video of people fleeing. And by the way, we have a lot of uncertainty during the 7th at the Nova Music Festival as to who did what, where, when, and how. Just to be fair, we now have admission from eyewitnesses and people within the government and military that they were directly involved in engaging vehicles and people fleeing from the event. Now, I'm not saying that everybody who was unalived at the event was done in that manner, but many were, as admitted now by Israel and by their officials as well as eyewitnesses. So we can't discount that as well. It plays a role in terms of figuring out. So there's no way the H group, just to be fair, unalived 1,200 civilians. That didn't happen. There may have been 1,200 fatalities that day. Sit down, dog. Sit down. Sit down. Please. There you go. There may have been 1,200 fatalities that day, but they were not all civilians. I think at least a third were uniformed personnel. And many who fled the Nova Music Festival were probably either in vehicles or on foot, unfortunately caught in whatever they were doing to try to take out the militants who had come across, or T-words, whatever you want to call it. And then in the kibbutzim, same thing. There were tanks and artillery and mortars and all sorts of mayhem that may or may not have contributed to some of those unfortunate civilian casualties. And of course, then you have the hostages. So, no, I'm not cheering on anything that involves civilians. I'm not even cheering on anything that engages military. I've been in a war on the front line in a tank unit. War is horrible. Death and destruction is horrible, no matter who's involved, soldiers, civilians, the whole nine yards, but especially civilians, especially young kids, older people, that kind of thing, non-combatants. And I'm totally against that. So no, I didn't cheer it on. What I said was, by the way, this is the precursor for this. There's a certain arrogance and ego that comes from the Israeli mindset towards people who are different than them. It just exists. That's not me saying this. Columnist Gideon Levy of Haaretz said that one of the unspoken truths about Israel is that a majority of the population looks down on people of Arab descent. People may vehemently disagree, but life inside of Israel, if you haven't talked to enough people, maybe give it a try. Yes, there are examples to the contrary. There's a small anecdotal set of evidence that some people who live in Israel, who happen to be Arab, do make it through part of Israeli society, positions in the Knesset, doctors, judges, etc. Yeah, that's there. But that is not indicative of a pervasive equal treatment under the law. Yes, the law specifies that people are to be treated equally. That's true. But in practice and in reality, there are plenty of laws on the books that directly, contradict that statement. And people's own experiences are they're basically second class for the most part. There's a lot of things they can't participate in. They get mistreated, blah, blah, blah. It happens in a lot of societies. It's not unique to Israel, but it is what it is. So this talking point that it's all equal. But getting back to the Nova Festival, what I basically said was, and this was in bad taste, I agree, and I did go on a pro-Israeli live, like I've done with other things that I've said that I'm not proud of, and I apologize for it. It was bad use of language. But I made the statement that it's what did I say? It's the exact language was. The flavor of what I was trying to say was basically, it's not so much fun when you're on the other side of the violence that you've been either knowingly or unknowingly supporting for decades, and your sort of arrogance and dismissal of the harm that your state causes to others. That's basically what I was trying to say. And I said it in a more distasteful way as people were running for their lives. And that's not fair for me to do, because I'm sure each and every person involved in that, whether they survived or didn't, it was got to be a nightmare. And that's unfair for me not to acknowledge that part of it. I do have shreds of humanity within me, and I don't want to see anybody hurt. It's just the anger and frustration that mounts. I've watched this for so long and have been frustrated for and with the Palestinian people forever. And they just never gotten a fair shake. And I said, it's just, you know what? There's something about somebody who's been arrogant and rude and condescending and egotistical and thinking they're the shit. And then one day, it's like the bully in school. They get punched back. And I think that that's not an unreasonable thing to look at and go, well, just desserts. Unfortunately, some people happen to be civilians. But to the soldiers who had stood on those outposts, making sure that people couldn't leave Gaza, who man the borders, who have intelligence on people who are double agents, those who actually actively shoot at people inside of Gaza or go in when they go in periodically mow the lawn, they're fair game. Because if you go into Google, type in, is a blockade an act of war? Because people have said from Israel, or who support Israel, everything was fine on 10/6. We had peace. It was a truce, or what do you call it, a more ceasefire. And that H group violated it horrifically, an unprovoked attack on the 7th, right? That's the narrative from the Israeli side. Well, guess what? That is a bunch of malarkey, because Israel was maintaining two things that are acts of war. One, an illegal military occupation of the West Bank and the Golan Heights. And two, a brutal siege/blockade where Israel decides, because of the rocket fire, to periodically go in there and just, destroy part of the place with very little regard, if any, for human life.
And they just do what they want because they have the power. It's a very asymmetric situation. Now, I will admit, if I was living in Israel, I would not want to be living under constant fear of rocket fire. I can see that. I've seen people in Israel when they're actually under a situation where these things are flying through the air. I can imagine that fear that would cause, especially on an ongoing basis. I acknowledge that, and it sucks. And the question comes down to why is that happening? And the motive that typically gets ascribed to that is they hate us, meaning from the Israeli perspective. They just hate us. They hate the Jewish people. They want us gone. And guess what? That is not true. Now, might there be some members of the group that feel that way? Sure. There might be some people that have hate in their heart. I'm not in their heads. But the reason they're angry, that anger, that reason to do what they're doing, that act of resistance, is against something that in their minds needs to be resisted. Absent that thing, they wouldn't be doing or forming what they formed or doing what they're doing with that formation. Why would they? So Angela is saying, and see if everybody agrees, and I'm going to point this out. I'll say what Angela says. Angela says, and this is an actual Holocaust 2.0. I can understand how people on the Israeli side see this as an egregious assault and an attack on their people and the largest loss of life since World War II in any one instance. I get that. If I were family members or part of the community, I would probably feel the exact same way. So I acknowledge that point of view. The reason why I see it from two different vantage points, and I tend to lean towards one side, is not because I want to take issue with Israelis. I could care less who the other side was. The point is, what was happening before, like I said a moment ago, Angela. And I know it's hard to acknowledge this. And you may have it under a different version from the government or the way you grew up or the way schools go or the conversation, the narrative, so to speak. But what most people see who finally take a look at this long and hard is that this situation is a result of not sort of just one day they woke up and said, hey, let's go do this. I'm bored. It's Saturday. No. The reason why things like this happen, these pushback events, these violent events, is because the ability to peacefully resolve the issues that are so important to another group of people that have been oppressed ruthlessly by the Israelis for decades are seemingly made impossible by the way their team negotiates vis-a-vis them. And the story that they give to the public and to their people is we've offered these people great deals 5 times, and every time they turn it down, they just don't want peace. They just want to attack us, right? That's the narrative. Angela, you may agree with that. Yeah, that's maybe how you feel. Guess what? There's only one problem with it, Angela. It's not true. It's not true. If you read the details of the negotiations that have occurred at every step along the way, you will find that none of the quote unquote peace offerings have excluded Israeli control militarily and economically of the territories. That's not autonomy. And Israel claims because its security supersedes any other issue, it continues to want to control everything. Somebody says you've been brainwashed. Well, Sailor, I tell you what, come on up here and let's do one thing at a time. Tell me the one thing that I'm kind of off base on, and let's cover it because I don't want to be wrong. And if you can correct the record or make me see it from a different vantage point that makes sense, I'll change my opinion right now. You have my word on that because I try to do things based on what I understand and reasonable observation and objective analysis. And as I've said before, Sailor, just try to be fair. I did a video called "If the Tables Were Turned," if the script were flipped, so to speak. If there had been an Arab nation that was created in 1948, that was sort of formulated by the British along with some other investors and some other happenstance, and it came to be a country in that territory, and all the Jewish residents got pushed out of their homes, or some stayed and were integrated into Arab culture, but they were sort of second class because they weren't Arab, and the others had to flee. A lot died, 15,000 or so died, 750,000 Jewish people had to flee under this alternate circumstance. A lot went to Gaza, some went to other countries as refugees, some settled into the West Bank. And then, of course, what has happened since? Well, what if this Arab government, because they didn't want to have this other group of Jewish people resisting them, they decided to put in massive lockdown of security. And then they decided in 1967 that the Jewish community was teaming up to try to take them over, so they decided to preemptively go in and take that territory. So not only did you have grandparents have to flee, but all the generations since are stuck having to deal with this second sort of incursion by a foreign military. Would that be considered fair? Your grandparents lost their homes. You get shot at in the leg, in the knee, in the head whenever you protest. These people, these Arabs come in and bulldoze your homes because you don't have a permit. The reason you don't have a permit is they won't give you one. You got to live somewhere. They have soldiers that snipe your kids. They come out and pour cement in your water wells. They set up checkpoints so you can't go to work efficiently. You can't move around. They set up separate roads that you can't drive on. They build settlements in your territory. So everywhere you fleed to is further fragmented by the people who come in from somewhere else in the world, from Morocco, from Saudi Arabia, from wherever, that aren't even native to the area. Now you're a Jewish person living under those circumstances and marginalized year after year. And these Arabs extend you these opportunities to have a change peacefully, but they never give you any freedom. So you say no because you just can't say no. And the Arab leadership acknowledges that they wouldn't have taken those deals because they're shitty. Now, with all that going on and all that lack of hope and anguish and all the hardship that creates from the occupying forces. If you don't believe me, you think I'm just making all this stuff up. There are great documentaries that'll kind of lay this out for you from people that have no relationship to Gaza or the West Bank, Palestine, or Israel. And there are plenty of Israeli Jewish people and other Jews around the world who used to be brought up as Zionists, who used to believe the stories that I would imagine that this particular person here in the chat said, and they've come to believe that they're just not true. And so therefore, they have a conscience, and therefore they speak up and they say, hey, I can't support this anymore. What's being done is not right. After what happened to our people in World War II, the horrific mistreatment, being treated as the other, subhuman, Untermenschen, and shipped off into ghettos, your property taken from you, then railed down to these work camps and exterminated. That is horrific and disgusting. That is a Holocaust. After that having happened to your grandparents, how can the children of that group of marginalized people do most of that horrific mistreatment to another because they feel it's for their benefit? That's the irony of all this. The abused, so and spoke, the group that's been abused, has now become the abusers. And a lot of people who are former Zionists get this. And they can no longer remain an allegiance to a state that is basically an ethno state that is doling out misery, suffering, unalivedness, control, occupation, and blockade. It's not the right thing to do. And it's actually the crazy part about this is, the idea of a Jewish homeland is so Jewish people are safe from persecution. Where's the least safe place to be right now in the world if you're Jewish? Where's the least safe place to be? Anybody want to answer in the comments? What's the least safe place you can be right now if you're Jewish in terms of potential harm? And I'm not talking about hostages that are inside of Gaza. Anybody have a guess? In Israel. Israel is the least safe place in the world right now for Jewish people. And why is that so? Because of the incredibly disproportionate and over-the-top, President Biden said that, indiscriminate bombing, President Biden said that Israel's been taking on as a part of its military campaign. And listen, I think any fair-minded person would say, okay, the H group attacked you. For the militants you didn't get on that day, it's fair to go after the leadership and it's fair to go after those individuals to try to root out the problem for the security of it. I get that. I think that's, under international law, the occupying force or the blockading force does not have a direct right to, invade and defend themselves. But I can understand the mindset of striking back. So, okay, fair enough. But when you say that's your mission, and then you do things that are counter to that mission, under the guise that you're going after Group A, but really you're mass murdering B and C. And why? Because you can, because the circumstances are in place where you have sort of the license to go do it, and you have the backing of the biggest superpower that's ever existed. Now, I don't know about you, I'm not for mass murder. I'm not for the civilians that were harmed or even the soldiers that were harmed, and I'm not for the hostages being taken. But remember, if you're going to point out the hostages and cry foul, look where things are vis-a-vis people who are taken to Israeli jails. Are they in fact guilty of crimes? Are they all T-words? Why does Israel have something called administrative detention? Why don't they try everybody for crimes that are committed? Why do they hold people without charge? Well, that's a fair question, right? So a lot of people view those that are in jail, whether they threw a stone that was a little one towards an armored vehicle, which is nothing, but yet they get convicted for 5 years or 7 years of T word by a military court. They may be a 13-year-old kid, for God's sakes. And maybe the boy that was playing next to him gets scooped up, who didn't do anything. He just happened wrong place, wrong time. They're in jail too, with no charges. Now, I don't know about you, but I consider that person to be more of a hostage than a prisoner because they're not convicted of anything and they didn't do anything. So it wouldn't be crazy for a force that's being blockaded to try to break out one time, try to inflict as much damage as it can to their military, gather intelligence for its collaborators. Unfortunately, it did some other things it shouldn't, but it brought back hostages with the idea. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying it makes sense. Just as it would if it were Jewish people living under that same oppression, same walled-in city, same controlled, blockaded territory that you're frustrated as hell and all you do is take it on the chin for decades. And now you have a chance to do something about it. You do what you can. It's what people do who are occupied. Now, if I'm getting this wrong somehow, come on up on the guest panel and clue me in, because I don't want to be somebody who's getting it wrong. I really don't. But that's my best take based on my observation. Like I said, I don't know anybody in the West Bank. I don't know anybody in Gaza. I'm not getting paid by anybody to say this. I get accused of that all the time. Oh, you're just a troll. You're a hack. You're a grifter. You're doing this for money. If I'm doing this for money, I'm the biggest fool that's ever lived. Okay? I would actually, believe it or not, you may not believe me, but TikTok does give me crumbs, right? I probably make $30 a week doing this. Now, if you think $120 a month is enough to make somebody like spend 30 hours a week working on videos and lives, you're out of your mind. It's like what? It's like $1 an hour. That's not for money. So I would actually, believe it or not, if I had a platform that I could pay $49.99 a month to be able to speak to people about what I've learned, I'd pay it. Because I think it's worth it to advocate for something that you know in your heart is the right thing to do and you're on the right side of history, at least as far as I can see it. I'm just a guy, it's my take. But I think I'm onto something. I mean, a lot of authors who have studied this agree with it. People who I've read, they agree. People like Aaron Mate, Max Blumenthal, Jimmy Dore, Ilian Pape, Norman Finkelstein, Miko Peled, Jonathan Randall, who's Jewish as Jewish gets, and many, many others. Abby Martin, a lot of people who I respect. Chris Hedges. You know, anybody who really starts to strip away the programming and takes a deep, hard look at this, as hard as it is to look at, sees the same thing. And even if you're for the security of Israel and you're for the Jewish homeland, if you can't acknowledge the realities that come with this, you're being disingenuous. If you're somebody who just doesn't know what you don't know, and you still only see or hear what the government tells you or the system of Hasbara puts out to the people who support Israel, okay, fair enough. You're someone who is programmed, indoctrinated, and you are willfully ignorant. And fair enough, it's hard to break free from this propaganda and programming. In fact, a lot of people who are under the spell of this, they claim that everybody else is brainwashed, like somebody did in the comments today about me. You're brainwashed. You're brainwashed. Somebody, you know what washed my brain? These two eyes opening up and just trying to take a look and figure out what's what. And I understand the Israeli argument. I've read Alan Dershowitz's book, The Case for Israel. I've read some Benny Morris. I've listened to people talk ad nauseum. I went to the pro-Israel rally in D.C., for gosh sakes. I go out of my way to try to understand other people's points of view as best I can. That's the fair thing to do. And the reason why I disagree with it is because the narrative that comes from the pro-Israel side is very self-serving, selfish, sort of cruel, barbaric, mean-spirited. It is a settler, colonial, racist, supremacist ideology. That's Zionism. And yes, having a Jewish state where people can be safe from persecution is a great goal, in my opinion. But the problem comes down to that, as great as an idea as that was, is that where it took place caused a huge amount of problems. And the idea that it was a land without a people, for a people without a land, is a fairy tale. And the fact that only Jews came in and made the desert bloom, and somebody said that wasn't until the Jews got there that the economy, that's bullshit. Go back and look at the history of Palestine. Look at books. You can go back and see photographs of what historic Palestine was like. It was developed. It wasn't a nation state. It didn't have a formal government as far as a total hierarchy like a nation state would. It didn't have defined borders, but it was a territorial people. that saw themselves in a collective way as a certain type of Arab people, although they were called Arabs at the time, that they saw themselves as Palestinians first and Arabs second, because they're tied to that land. And that's why the dispossession of the land was such a serious deal. So go back and look at the books. I mean, don't trust me. Watch a documentary called Al Nakba. It has amazing cinematography and shows exactly what was in place. Watch a documentary called Tantora. Yes, there were massacres on both sides. I agree with that. That's true. But the vast majority of them happened from pro-Israel, pro-Jewish groups against people who were Palestinian Arab. Go look at the history. There's like 11 and 2. And way more people were unalived in the 11 than the 2. Go look at the math. Not that any one person isn't a horrific situation to have, but naming those 2 massacres that took place in the late 30s, early 40s, and saying that that justifies, that's nothing versus what the Israelis did. And David Ben-Gurion. Go back and read quotes by David Ben-Gurion. I can pull some up on my computer right now. I have them recorded on my phone. He said, it's their land. We're the ones taking it from them. We have to somehow find a way to do it and manage the problem of them hating us for it. Just type into Google, David Ben-Gurion quotes Palestine, and you'll find all the stuff I'm talking about. I'm not making this stuff up. So even the leaders who led the creation of Israel, the first prime minister, acknowledged they were a colonial project. They were stealing land from others. They were cleansing the land of Palestinian Arabs. That's what they did. They knew it. They did it anyway. They knew it was going to cause a ton of trouble. So did the American government, because Harry Truman was the person that oversaw it. So did the very nascent UN, this very small body that was just getting going. They made a very difficult but very, unfortunately, tumultuous decision that's led to so much violence and rancor, and it was all unnecessary. There are plenty of other places in the world where this could have occurred and had the same attributes of safety, even more so for people who had been oppressed, which is really what the goal should be, right? That's the ultimate goal. Now, you can bring in the historical biblical ties and say, well, God gave it to so-and-so. Yeah, let's go back 4,000 years ago, and the Canaanites were kicking everybody's ass. And if you do a check of people's 23andMe, you'll find that only a small percentage of the current population of Israel has the DNA or the 23andMe from that territory. However, you test 99% of people who live in Gaza or the West Bank or elsewhere, and you're going to find that it aligns perfectly with the heritage that comes from that territory historically, well before it was called Palestine, long ago. Now, there were people who were indigenous who were Jewish. That's indisputable, just not a very large percentage. Most of modern day Israel has a lot of Ashkenazi and other European immigrants who weren't wanted elsewhere by anybody. And when they came into historic Palestine in the early 1900s and after, they were relatively welcomed into the territories, relatively peacefully. It was only after the density and the exponential growth of that immigration started to tilt the balance of what consider the normal balance of a society, that things got difficult. And then, of course, all the talk with the Balfour Declaration and all the backdoor dealing, which was sort of pushing up to this event, that's why it got attacked. It was an underhanded attempt to force something on a group of people, which that's not fair. You don't want Jewish people to be marginalized and harmed. Why would you want to harm another group? That's how I see it. I'm happy that people got a benefit. I'm just not happy about the people who got the bad end of the stick. And when you look at things in life from one point of view, what can I get and who cares get hurt? What do you think people think of you? You're antisocial, you're selfish, you're a sociopath. So one could argue that the settler, colonial, racist, Zionist movement has callous disregard for who gets harmed in the process as long as a certain group gets what they want. And that mindset seems to pervade every subsequent action thereafter. And that's my argument, is that the mindset is at the core of the problem, and the propaganda that somehow tries to justify what I believe is unjustifiable. It's an injustice, and it's historically unremedied, and something of some sort of remedy needs to come out of it, or there'll never be peace. And if you unalive every single H group member right now, just snap your fingers, they surrender. And you got them all in prison, or you've unalived every single one of them. The mentality of resistance, the mindset, you can't extinguish. So why would somebody maintain that mindset? Because they're bloodthirsty and they hate Jewish people? Nope. As nice as that may sound to try to justify what Israel's doing, it's not the truth. People from Palestine have said, if my Arab cousin came and did to me what the Israeli people did, I would fight my Arab cousin, because it's what people have done to them that prompts their behavior and reaction, not abject hatred in their hearts, or some kind of racism or some sort of hate for the group of Jewish people. That's an absurd excuse used to try to justify the oppression and all the cruelty and all the things they make the Palestinians submit to. And that's what I don't like. That's it. That's it. That's the only thing. Listen, like I said, if the tables were turned, I would be advocating right now for Jewish independence. I would say these people that are doing this thing to the Jewish people, it has to stop. Yes, the Jewish people went into this Arab state and they unalived, 1,100 people, whatever the number was, and they did horrible things. But still, the Jewish civilian population should not pay the price, even if they voted for the administration among which they had this militant group that went and did this stuff, because that's collective punishment. It's a war crime. It's not fair. People shouldn't have to starve. Babies should not starve to death or be crushed in the downing of buildings that have nothing to do with the actual military conflict. Indiscriminate bombing, as President Joe Biden referred to. Over the top, as President Joe Biden said. A disproportionate response of magnitudes unimaginable suffering. The displacement and homelessness made of people. 2 million people are down in the South or so. The ones that are scattered through the central and north are starving to death. This can't be the best Israel has to offer. If this is the best the Jewish state has to give the world, it is worthy of condemnation. And I know there has to be better people in Israel. And I know a lot don't like the Netanyahu government. But I would argue, somebody says it's not disproportionate. Tango Whiskey, let's do a quick math exercise here. So pull out your calculator, and I want you to type in 30,000, type in 1,200 divided by 30,000. Or you can type in 30,000 divided by 1,200. In fact, I'd do it right now if I could, didn't mess up the live. And you're going to get about 27 to 1. 27 and a half to 1, if my math is correct. That's what we call in the world disproportionate. If it was 1 to 1, 1.5 to 1, maybe 1 to 2, still disproportionate, but 27-point change, you're going to say it's not disproportionate? I apologize when I say this, but your math skills are in need of great help. And whatever you were doing that day in school, go to Google and learn that stuff, man. There's plenty of stuff on YouTube you can pull up to learn how to do basic math. So Tango Whiskey, I would say Tango. I'd say your Whiskey Tango Foxtrot on that statement. Yeah, well, Freedom says in the fact. Yeah, here's the other part of the puzzle here. Remember that Israel plays a role in all this. Okay, they have something called the Hannibal Directive, which guides their rules of engagement. So they dropped munitions on locations in Gaza where people, unfortunately, who were held hostage got killed. That's horrible. And I hope every single person who's remaining in custody in Gaza makes it back safely and unharmed to their families. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. If you ask a group of people who have been under the thumb militarily and economically and in every way humiliated for decades by another group, and you say to them, lay down your arms and send back our people and everything will be fine. No, it won't be fine. The reason they did this in the first place is because things weren't fine. So I don't want to see hostages maintaining being held, but I also understand the reason why a group of people who have been marginalized for so long would want to use whatever tactic they can to gain leverage. And I wouldn't want to be a hostage. I'm sure they're living in difficult situations. I don't know what the food situation is. I don't know what the hygiene is. I don't know what the accommodations are. It can't be pleasant. There is a broader context to be considered, though. That it's unfair to just say, gimme, 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 take everything. You can't keep thinking that way, because that thinking is what has led us here. It's not a one-sided thing. And yes, both sides need to give. Israel needs security, granted. But the revised 2017 charter grants that. It says in no uncertain words that although they don't want to recognize the regime because they disagree with the totality of what's happened for the last 75 years, they're willing to accept a two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders, which means you got to undo your settlements. It was your choice to settle the territory, even though the entire world said that wasn't your land. You took it by force, which, according to everybody after World War II, was a no-no. And yet you say it was defensive. So if I'm standing across the room from you with my fist clenched, and I'm looking at you funny, and then you pull out a submachine gun and blast me away, you get my neighbors, you take my house, you take my entire neighborhood, you take the entire county and town, and then say, I was defending myself. No, you weren't. That's considered offense. Newsflash, grab a dictionary. So while you're getting your math class, also go to Webster's dictionary and look up defense. What's going right now in Gaza is not defense. It's called mass murder. And it's enough to meet the standard of genocide. Go look the definition up. I'm not making this stuff up. And the case brought by South Africa through the International Court of Justice was not done for some frill, some abject bias against Israel like they claim is at the UN. No, that's bullshit. People have other things to do with their lives than bring these cases against some rogue country. They bring it because they're a signatory, as is Israel. And yet they've chosen to behave in a certain way. They've prosecuted this war in a way that involves massive amounts of indiscriminate bombing, total disregard for human life, and the unfortunate unaliving of tens of thousands of human beings, including over 11,000 children. No war ever in recent history involves the unaliving of anywhere near that many children. Journalists, over 200 journalists have been targeted and murdered by the Israelis. This is not some accidental thing like, oops. The Israeli military is going through Gaza step by step, place by place, and just leveling the place. And totally safety be damned for those people who live there, tough luck. And they're not being held against their will as human shields. Take that story and go shove it somewhere else. That is absolute ridiculousness. So if you're somebody who disagrees and you want to come up and set me straight, I want somebody to come up and set me straight. Where do I have this wrong? I've read a lot of books. I've listened to hundreds of hours of podcasts and lectures and debates. And I'm trying to see the part of the Israeli story that makes sense, that's justifiable, that's worthy of praise. And I would love to give that praise. Trust me, I really sincerely would. But I think in order to get the praise, you have to do something that's praiseworthy. And we have interviews with soldiers right now in Gaza that are laughing about shooting people, unarmed civilians, just laughing, telling people, I just shot this old man. Was he armed? Nope. He was beside a bed begging for his life, so I shot him. Ha! And they're shaking hands and giving high fives. I got it on my phone right here. I can play it for you right now. I have hundreds of examples of that on my phone in terms of bombs being dropped on buildings with no notice. Pictures of people caught in the rubble. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures of dead children. Women, twisted bodies, limbs missing, unrecognizable body parts. Sorry for the graphic imagery. But, we hear all this horrible things that happened on 10/7. What happened on 10/7 is a smidge, and it was bad. But in comparison, it's a smidge of the mass mayhem, mass murder, and genocide that Israel's been carrying out against the people of Gaza and in the West Bank. Let's not forget the people in the West Bank who have been tortured and murdered purposely by the IDF and settlers. It's happening in real time. You can deny it till you're blue in the face. It's happening. Just heard a report today of a young teen, maybe 11 years old, from this guy Wally that I follow here, who's one of his brother's cousins or something like that. And he said they just shot him in the head. Just wasn't doing anything wrong. Just standing around. Boom. That's what Israel does. And there's no accountability for the soldiers. None, zero, zilch. And it's part of policy. They're allowed to do it. The government just looks the other way. The military just says, do what you want. You got the power. So be it. Now, Israelis and people who support Israel will say all day long, that's not true. That never happened. You're propagandized. Open your eyes. I have video that I've posted on TikTok showing this happening in the West Bank. And it got taken down. So I had to redo the video to hide the person that had this happen. They got right in the side of the head. I just put up a video a couple days ago that showed a settler on a road driving by a delivery truck that was being driven by a Palestinian driver. And he just grabs his you-know-what and points out the window and just bang. Now, luckily, it hit just behind the door. So I showed the during and the after when they showed a picture of the hole in the side of the vehicle. and it got taken down for violence. But I think reality should be shown. The rogue nature, the arrogance and the dismissiveness and the supremacy and the mindset of most Zionists is reprehensible vis-a-vis the damage that gets inflicted upon Palestinians. That's what I object to. Yeah, and Israel the whole time somehow says it's this small little country with all these bad countries surrounding it, and all they want to do is push us into the sea and unalive us. They want a second H cost, and all we're doing is defending ourselves from these rogue people who hate Jews. That's what we hear all the time. That is a tired, pathetic BS story. That's a make-believe fantasy. You might as well grab the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus and have a party with that, because that's bullshit. This is an asymmetric slaughter, one-sided slaughter of civilians with a little bit of infighting against the enemy, most of whom are getting the better end of the Israeli forces. I just saw today that 27, with 0 casualties on the H group side, 27 Israeli soldiers died yesterday in an attack. I'm not happy for that, but I'm just letting you know that this arrogance that the Israelis have this huge superior military and they're not doing well in Gaza. It's a hard place to fight. But this narrative coming out of the Israeli government, it's all lies. The people who fight in these tunnels are hardened, very dedicated, very committed fighters. And they're not afraid to die. The average conscript in Israel that's doing their service was on the beach in Tel Aviv doing TikToks and dancing and drinking, 2 months ago, 3 months ago. And now what? Now they're in a uniform, poorly trained, they barely know how to shoot a rifle, and they're in a combat zone with hardened fighters who have been waiting their whole life for this. And they're willing to give their life and do it. And they're working out of tunnels. They can pop up, pop down. It's a tough thing to do. I feel badly for the Israeli military. I do. It's an impossible mission. And yet along the way, they're committing war crimes, just like the U.S. did in Vietnam. They were frustrated they couldn't get the soldiers in the tunnel. So what do? They grab a bunch of civilians and shoot them. They grab men. Just saw a report today on CNN that showed that Israel is torturing men they pick up. They put their hands behind their back. They blindfold. They put them in a diaper in freezing weather. And they just leave them in horrific conditions. Their words, not mine. And this is going on widespread. They collect up the men who aren't members of the H group. They say they are. They're not. Because where are the members of H group? They're with the militants, with weapons, fighting. Not a guy that used to run an ice cream shop, hiding in his house with his family, and they come and take the father. They strip him down. They humiliate him. They stick him in the back of a truck. They don't feed him or give him water for 4 days. This is Israel. This is the problem. This is the rogue state of Israel. I hate to say this, but the people that support this stuff and the people that do these things, they are not good human beings. They're rotten to the core. And it's not because they're inherently bad people. It's because of their mindset and their behavior. That's what's worthy of criticism, not who they are or their ethnicity. That's irrelevant. And I would love to sing the praises. If Israel would start doing praiseworthy stuff, like maybe just going after the militants, for example, I would say that that's very commendable. That makes sense to me, as hard as it is. But to keep bombing civilians, it's cowardly. And pilots in the group Breaking the Silence, if you think I'm lying, go listen to Israeli pilots, go listen to former IDF members, because they say what I'm saying. They're not lying. They served. They were somebody who was there. They've gone into the West Bank. They've terrorized people's houses. They've shot civilians. They've destroyed people's homes. They've poured cement in water wells. They've ripped up people's crops. They've poured gasoline on people's farmland. They've sprayed sewage water on people's homes. They've welded the door shut of people's homes to the front so it can be a Jewish-only road to walk down. And the Palestinians have to walk out the back and climb down a ladder out of their back window. What the hell is that stuff? Are you proud of that? Is that indicative of being good? I think that's pretty bad. So yeah, it's wanton cruelty and indifference to the suffering and the lives of Palestinians. That's a great way to put it. And that is, unfortunately, the stain that accompanies Zionism. And as long as it's a settler colonial-minded project, taking land and horribly mistreating and murdering people, that's that there's never going to be an end to resistance. That's never going to breed peace. And why would it? Go try this as an exercise today, just in case you're wondering. Find anybody, I'm not recommending you do this, just theoretically. Go to some street corner where somebody's standing waiting across the street, slap them in the face, figuratively. Are they going to look at you and smile? Probably not. No different here. How can you expect differently? They're not just getting up one day going, I wonder if I can go smash an occupation soldier because I have nothing better to do. No, they're sick and tired of being horrifically mistreated, totally no dignity, no respect, not even valued in any way, shape, or form. You basically figuratively shit on them 24/7 and then somehow hold them to a standard that they should be peaceful. They're all just terrorists. All they want to do is unalive Jews. No, it isn't. They're sick of their plight. Their plight sucks. And it is Zionism and the supporters of Zionism that are backing, that they're supporting the plight they find themselves in. They're creating the problems unnecessarily so. It's like wounding somebody, which is bad enough with a big knife, and then taking your finger that's dirty and sticking it in there constantly. There's no need to do that. You've already debilitated them. Why do you do it? Because you can, because you're cruel. And it's the abject cruelty of Zionism and indifference of Zionism that I take the biggest issue with. And I think most Jewish people, if they knew what their government and their military does, hopefully, if they're a decent human, would be against it. But many don't, because they've been told by their government since birth that keeping these people down is important for our safety and security because all they want to do is kill us. And therefore, whatever's done is justifiable because it's to that end. But that, my friends, on both sides of the aisle, is 100% horseshit. Has no basis in reality. And for those who are Israeli, you don't believe me, I'll give you a resource. And most people will never look at this because they're stubborn. They want to hear what they want to hear. They want to go to their little pro-Israel echo chambers. Well, I bring people up here all the time who completely disagree. I let them say what they want to say. I don't berate them. I don't cut them off. I'm not mean. And yet I try to go to one of their lives, and what I do is all personal attacks. Because you know why? Because what I'm saying to the audience right now can't be refuted. So if you can't refute somebody's factual, accurate statements, you have to disparage them personally. But I don't take that tact because that shows weakness, that shows arrogance, it shows ego. And I have to control in this life to do whatever I want. I'm in control. I'm in charge. I don't like to wield that power in a way that's dismissive of someone else's decency. And it says a lot about people. You learn a lot about what they do when they have power. How do they wield it? Are they kind and benevolent with that power? Or are they ruthless and callous and cruel and indifferent to the pain and suffering they cause by projecting that power? And we're getting our answer right now. And we have been for 75 years. It's clear as day. And this is why the TikTok thing is so problematic and other social media. Everybody is waking up. And even the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt, has admitted that they have a huge, huge demographic problem with young people. They said that something like 73% of all young people polled supported what was done on 10/7. That's a pretty big number. And why in the heck would they support something so atrocious like that? Is it because they hate Jewish people? All the young people in the United States hate Jewish people? Is that what it is? Nope. They can see the barbarity, the barbaric nature of Zionists and this Israeli war machine in how they're projecting their power and with callous disregard, mass murdering, there's no other way to put it, innocent lives, tens of thousands of human beings that should not be dead right now, that should not be hungry, that should not be without clean water, that should have medical supplies. But they don't. You want to know why? Because of Zionist cruelty. Zionist cruelty. And it's hard to like and behave nicely to somebody who's cruel to you forever and ever. And listen, there may be some people in Israel, like 80% of the public was asked recently, is the government doing the right amount, too much, or too little in Gaza? And 80% said too little. They want the military to do more bombing, to bring in more vehicles, more soldiers, to kill more people, because they're out for bloody revenge. They're the ones who are bloodthirsty, in my opinion. So we got a couple guests in the queue. I know I've been talking for quite a while here. Trouble getting here? Oh, it just froze up. It froze up for a second. If you have any trouble getting in, you have to leave and come back. You have to close the app. In fact, I'm going to go back.
Hi, how are you doing?
Yeah. Drink water. Turn the light on in here. So right now, both of you are timing out. If you can still hear me, I'm going to take off my earbud. So if you're not getting in, you actually have to leave. You have to leave the app and then come back in and re-request. It should work.
It works for me,
So,
Chip.
I know.
The person was there first.
This happens. What happens elsewhere is also worthy of criticism. It's just I'm very familiar with this particular conflict, more so than I am with others. And I agree, if this kind of behavior is happening elsewhere, it should be condemned equally. But this has been going on for more than 150 days. And it's reprehensible, it's disgusting, and it needs to stop. And I've been saying that for a long time. Can everybody hear me okay? Because somebody says they can't hear me. Can somebody just say the number 1 if they can hear me? Or type the number 1. Okay, people can hear me. So maybe, Tammy, you may have to come back in or change your settings or whatever it's called. Okay, we got the 2 people coming back in here. Let's see if we can get them up. I don't want to be so harsh. I don't want to be negative. I want to say positive things. I want to see there be peace. But I can understand the depth of suffering and frustration that must accompany living in Palestine. I've never been through it, but I try to empathize with people who are going through that. And I empathize with people who are in Israel who are under rocket fire. And I empathize with the hostages. I empathize with the families and the people that were harmed on 10/7, obviously. And it's hard not to see the other side as disproportionate. Otherwise, you're not being fair and honest. Because it's not the H group forcing people to sit in a building somewhere and let the bombs fall. That's a bullshit story. If you have underground tunnels to operate in, why on earth would you go up and hide in a 4-story building and wait to be bombed? Because they hate life and they want to unalive their people because they don't like their people and that they want to make Israel look bad. Do you believe that? I could tell a 3rd grader that story. They'd be like, you got to be kidding me. It's really stupid. It's really, really, really stupid story. Okay. All right. Let's see if we can get these guests up here. So we have Avi Sweets and we have Brenda. Let me bring them up
Hi,
here.
how are you doing?
I got to get some water while we're talking.
How are you?
Raspy. Okay, Avi, what would you like to say?
How are
Welcome.
you, Chip? First of all, I want to appreciate you that I go
Avi, are you there?
into lives.
If you're speaking,
Yeah.
Avi, we cannot hear you. At least I
Can you
can't
hear me? Are you hear me?
I'm grabbing some water. Sorry, guys.
Can you hear me?
Okay, they're saying they can hear him. I can't hear you, Avi. So I don't know what's going on with that. So obviously,
Yeah.
if we're going to do a
Yeah.
Q&A, I got to be able to hear you. Because
Chip, can you hear me?
Let's
Maybe
try
it's
dropping you
you.
one more time. And
Chip,
then
can you hear
see
me?
if we can. And by the way,
I
just
think
let
Chip
you
is.
know in the chat,
I think
I'm
it's
not
Chip,
dropping Avi
yeah.
because he's Avi. I'm dropping Avi because I can't hear him.
Hey, Chip,
And
can
I
you?
can't. Brenda's not coming up either. It's good to have people on with different points of view, and I would really ask the chat if you don't mind. And by the way, I'm not even seeing the chat right now. I tell you what I probably have to do. Let me see if I can go back. Wi-Fi off. Okay, so if you can still hear me, I'm not seeing the comments anymore either. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to restart the live. I know it's about 7:30, so give me a second. I'm going to restart it. Come on back in. I'll be up in about 2 minutes, okay? Sorry about the interruption. All right, I got to end the live. Where's the end the live button? I thought it was right there. Oh, it's up here. There we go. Sorry about the wait.